As Rabbi Lorge acknowledged earlier this evening, this has been a difficult week. And because of the tragedies that have been on our minds these past few days, we have decided that for reasons you will see in a few moments, this is the appropriate point in our service to offer words of Torah. How? How is the most versatile word in our quiver of questions. It is also the most agonizing. How many were killed? How many were injured? How are their families? How could a person do such a thing? How could this happen? How is this possible? How do we go on? Echa yashva vadad, ha'ir rabati am haita ka'almana. How does she sit so lonely? The city once full of people has become a widow. How begins the book of Lamentations, the text that we read this coming Saturday evening as we begin the observance of Tisha B'Av, the saddest day of the Jewish year. On Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of the month of Av, we Jews mourn first and foremost the destruction of our first and second temples in Jerusalem. But we have piled many more horrors onto the ash heap of history that we memorialize this day. The sin of the golden calf, the launch of the First Crusade, our expulsions from England and Spain and France, and the liquidation of the Warsaw Ghetto. When I first heard the news in horrific succession of last weekend's massacres in El Paso and Dayton, feeling the imminent arrival of Tisha B'Av, my laments turned to lamentations. Echa. How? How again? How, after Pittsburgh and Thousand Oaks, after Aurora and Virginia Beach, after Gilroy and Brooklyn, how, after so many more that didn't make the headlines? How lonely those cities sit, once alive with back-to-school shopping and county fairs, with bar hopping and communal prayers, now full of widows, widowers, and orphans. We have had 255 mass shootings in America in 2019. We have had 221 days. An essential feature of Tisha B'Av is that we use a single day of the year as a vessel to contain the unimaginable grief of centuries of tragedies. For one day, in the high heat of summer, we dim the lights, we sit on the ground, we fast from sunset to sunset. We aren't even supposed to say hello to each other. This was the wisdom of the architects of Jewish time, who created cathedrals in our calendar to give ritual structure to our much-needed moments of catharsis. But Tisha B'Av is only supposed to be one day. So how do we live in a world in which we've seen more mass shootings than days of the year? How do we live in a world with so much anger that we rightfully howl at our leaders to do something? How do we live in a world with so much fear that we have to pass through metal detectors to pray for peace? How do we live in a world with so much sadness that we find ourselves so impossibly hopeless? How do we mourn when our pain is so consistent, so pervasive, so deep, and so exhausting that our souls feel empty? In a meditation on the meaning of Tisha B'Av, Rabbi Alan Liu offers an astonishing reflection on the primary objects of our mourning for this day. He observes that even while our ancestors' temples stood, ultimately they were structures that were centered around emptiness. The Torah tells us that the Holy of Holies, the sacred heart of those two temples, was defined precisely by its vacancy. But on Tisha B'Av, Liu writes, it is as if this emptiness has broken loose from its bounds and swallowed everything up. How do we overcome the emptiness of our devastation? Remarkably, a midrash on the book of Lamentations imagines God asking this very same question. On the first Tisha B'Av, when the first temple was destroyed, God was inconsolable, with no idea how to go on. And so God called to the ministering angels and asked them, a king of flesh and blood, how does he mourn? And the angels replied, he sits alone in silence. And God responded, I shall do so as well. And after sitting alone in silence, God asked the angels again, a king of flesh and blood, how does he mourn? And the angels replied, he sits and he cries. And God responded, I shall do so as well. How do we go on? We go on first by pausing, by sitting in silence, by sitting and crying, by taking the time to create space in our souls to contain the emptiness that our pain has unbound. In our depleted spiritual state caused by this every day is Tisha B'Av world, what we need now, more than anything, is spaciousness.